Okay, welcome everyone to the first in what will hopefully be a fairly regular series of devlogs on Project Titan. It's a real-time action strategy game that a few of us have been working on for quite some time now, and it's finally in a condition where we can start showcasing some of the gameplay and some of its more unique features. So in this first devlog, I wanted to show you the research options that are available in the game. They're a little different to most strategy games that are out there, and the impact that this has on resource usage within the game. So I've created a quick test level here, which we use to stress test some of the code and make sure things are behaving more or less as they should. We've got three buildings that are already created. The one in the foreground is your command center. This will be the very first building that you build when starting a level, and it is key to the success of your game. You can have more than one, but if you lose all of these buildings, all of the command centers, then your game is over. The second building off to the right in the background is a reactor facility. I'll come back to this in a minute, but essentially this is critical to extracting energy resources and distributing them to every other unit in the game: buildings, mobile units, troops, etc. There is only one resource in Project Titan. It's not like sort of traditional RTS games where you have wood, stone, gold, food, etc. The only resource is geothermal energy, and the reactors extract that. But not all locations are equal, so you need to scan the surroundings to see where the best locations are for building your reactors, or the worst locations to avoid, as they will become quite contentious as the game expands, because everyone is going to want to build their power plants there to get the most amount of energy. The building in the far distance that you can just see through this rather murky morning that we've got is a research facility, and that's really, you know, how that behaves is kind of the focus of this devlog. But as it's the first one that we've done, I thought it would be worth giving a little bit of a quick introduction into how resources are extracted and transferred around the map and consumed by the various units that you've got. So as I said, the first unit that you will build when your team land on the planet to start their mission is the command center. This is a Mark III, so it's quite a chunky building. In game units, it's probably about 300 meters across, so there is quite a lot to see if you're up close. All of the buildings in Titan are fully enterable and explorable. They all have interiors that you can enter, and damage that you cause internally has real implications for the building. If you attack the components that are distributed around the units, you can affect, you know, the shields, the fuel reserves, its ability to function. And similarly, if you kill the crew that are in each of these units, it will start to degrade the building's performance. Once this is built, typically the very next building that you would create would be your reactor, which is this guy over here. The command centers are pretty self-sufficient in terms of power. No other building is. You can equip them as part of the unit profiles to have local fuel cells and power plants, which will keep them going in the event that they lose sort of grid power temporarily, but it will only keep them running for maybe 5 minutes before they're going to start shutting down and will be open to attack. Normally they get power from the equivalent of the national grid, if you like. It's called the resource transfer network. It's a really critical part of Titan, and fairly unique in this type of game. And it's basically a mesh that is responsible for connecting buildings together. You can't see it. It's an underground feature, and each building has a number of interfaces that can connect. Command centers have quite a few because they're quite critical. Other smaller outposts may only have one or two, so you can connect less to them. But they have a a finite amount of capacity to move stuff across. So if you try to draw more power than they can transfer, even if your reactors are capable of giving it, the connections between them won't be able to transfer it, and units will start to suffer from brownouts, loss of power, which will start to impair their operation fairly quickly. So planning the RTN is pretty key to a successful game. The reactor being the second building, and once you've got that in place, every other building that you build needs to have a connection on the resource network back to both a power station of some sort. Could be a reactor, it could be a generator, which is for sort of short-term tactical use, or indeed a wind farm. We're environmentally friendly, and you can have wind power to supplement the geothermal energy that you get. And buildings also need to have a connection back to one of the command centres that you build. You can have more than one. It's recommended that you do have more than one for resilience. But all of the orders from your crew up in orbit, all the strategic orders, are distributed to the units via the command centre. They go across the resource network to the nearest building, and if it's a mobile unit, they are then transmitted wirelessly to that unit. So if you lose comms, whilst your units will still function autonomously, you won't be able to give them any new orders until you've restored comms. And if they lose access to grid power, then they're going to be in a sticky situation fairly quickly, because their local reserves, particularly if the building is under attack, and its shields and weapon systems are drawing a lot of power, everything is power based. They will drain the reserves quite quickly depending on how you've configured the unit, and then the shields and the weapons will fail, and you'll lose the building. So that is very quickly is an overview of the resource management. As I said, it is a key part of the game, but it isn't handled in quite the same way as most other RTS style games do. Everything that you build, whether it be a building or a mobile unit, a tank, drone, whatever, or a troop unit, a soldier, they are all configured with profiles, and you can have more than one per type of unit, but they define exactly how you've configured your unit to operate. So the unit's function depends on what you've chosen to put in it, what types of components. Each unit has a number of slots internally, and you can fill them with whatever components you want for the type of mission you've got in mind. It could be heavy on stealth, it could be shields, it could be additional fuel cells and power plants for long-range recon missions. You can customize the units significantly, and it also controls the weapon systems that are on there, the types of weapons that you've got available. You can choose how you want to equip your units with those, but everything that you put in the unit will affect the amount of power that it draws. In turn, that will affect the amount of heat that it generates, and it will affect the overall mass of the unit. Not so relevant for buildings, but for anything that moves, the heavier it is, the slower it's going to move, and more fuel it will take to do that. So everything is a trade-off, and units all have maximums for those things, and whilst you can equip them beyond that, if you start enabling too many of those components at the same time and draw too much power, it's going to start to damage the unit, because it's effectively overloading its power systems, and if that situation is not fixed, then the unit will eventually destroy itself, because you can't leave them running in an overloaded state indefinitely. Short term you can get away with it, and units can repair themselves, so as long as you withdraw from the front line, it can go and heal its wounds and go back again, but power and heat management are quite key, and the hotter a unit runs, the more visible it's going to be to sort of thermal cameras, night vision, those sorts of things. So everything has a knock-on effect. Okay, with that said and done, the main purpose of this menu, this system I wanted to show you was for the menu, for the research. Everything in the game is done through a context menu. This is still work in progress, so it will change, it will be refined, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the kinds of things that are on there. top item on there will be frequently used actions that you specify, so that will change over time. Tactical commands are things that typically affect a single or small group of units. They are very localized in their scope and will apply to whichever units you've got selected at that time. If the option isn't applicable for the kinds of units, it won't be on this list. This is the full set, but we will hide things that are not applicable, so you'll only see things that make sense. You've also got the aggression stance down here. Every unit can either be aggressive, in which case as soon as it sees an enemy unit, it will go after it to a point. If it deviates too far from its current patrol path or whatever it is that it's doing, it will give up and come back. So you don't have to worry about your units all wandering off across the map indefinitely. But it will take an aggressive response to any unit that it detects. Passive unit, it will defend itself, so it will ignore enemy units for the most part, and unless they give you reason not to. So if they start attacking, it will defend itself, but otherwise it will ignore them. Stealth, it will actively seek to not be detected by enemy units. This could involve moving out of their sensor range. It could involve enabling one of a number of stealth options that the units have got. But it will attempt to not be detected. It's quite useful if you're sending units on long range recon and you don't want the enemy to know that you're there. That deals with most of that automatically for you, so you can get on with actually playing the game. Every unit can be equipped with a range of sensors. Some of them detect thermal heat. You've got audio sensors, so the units can hear things. If something makes more noise, it will be more detectable to something that is listening. You've got your traditional sort of optical stealth. That's actually invisibility cloak, if you like, which makes things harder to see in the visible spectrum. Radar stealth, and of course night vision. The game has full dynamic weather and lighting, so you've got day, night, storms, sunshine, etc. And these will all behave differently depending on sort of local environmental conditions, which in turn are dictated by where the island is on the planet. So if it's equatorial, you're going to have sort of hotter weather, and sort of longer or cooler rather day and night cycles, whereas if it's more of a polar level, then it's going to be colder, so things like thermal will be much more important to your gameplay for those sorts of levels. Movement, so you can define waypoints, so even when a unit is first constructed, you can predefine a waypoint that you want it to follow. So as soon as it's created, it will either start patrolling around a building or it will start making its way to the front line. And there's a number of options that you can specify on those waypoints. And you've got pursue, flee, evade, take cover, and just follow units. So follow usually would be with stealth enabled. So if you found a unit and you want to follow it back to its base without being detected, that's what that is. You've got a number of formations that you can define for groups of units. These are sort of standard military formations, and you can filter how these are applied within your selection. So maybe you only want them to apply to boats, or maybe you only want them to apply to mechs, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of control over how you apply these. Strategic, this is probably going to be a separate devlog because it's quite involved. But very quickly, the ARS is the automated repair system. Every unit can be equipped with it. You don't get it by default, you don't get anything by default. But that is a rules-based system that lets you prioritize the order in which you want things to be repaired and the conditions under which you don't want them to be repaired. So if your unit is low on fuel or low on power, or you're retreating from the enemy and you're in neutral territory or safe territory, but you're low on fuel, you might want to not spend that fuel repairing things just so you can get the unit back to base so as it can be repaired fully. That's all set within there. Combat computer rules. This is quite a powerful system, and it lets you set up a whole range of event-based rules. So if this happens and that happens, then do this. It allows for a lot more autonomy of your units. So they are large maps that are on this game, so you can have units all over the place doing their thing. The combat computer, if equipped, will do its best to keep them alive as long as possible without your intervention. Config profiles for the units. This is a whole separate screen. Brings up kind of like a blueprint type layout, and that lets you choose which specific components and weapons you want to place where. Their location will affect the damage that they receive if the unit is attacked. So if you've got all of your shield generators at the back of your tank, if the tank is attacked from behind, your shield generators will take the brunt of that impact, whereas if they was at the front, they wouldn't. So placement is quite important, particularly on bigger buildings. They have a large footprint, so choosing where you put your most sensitive items is quite important. Tech tree, as you'd expect, there is a very large, both broad and deep tech tree, which I'm going to come on to the research of that very shortly. Unlike a lot of RTS games, this tech tree is designed to be researched and unlocked over the entire campaign mode of the game. So it's not something that you would unlock within a single level. It will take the entire sort of duration of the campaign to stand any chance of unlocking the sizable chunk of that. And it is also interchangeable with your online profile. So multiplayer games, you only have one player identity in this, whether you're playing single player or multiplayer, and you switch between the two interchangeably. So progress made in one is applicable to the other, as are losses. RTN load. So this will show you a set of data and schematics to do with the current loading on your resource network. So I mentioned that each of these buildings has got like underground interfaces that connect them together. This shows you how busy they are, and if any are in danger of becoming overwhelmed, because if they are, you might want to build additional buildings there to spread the load and make sure that everything can receive the power that it needs. Power usage is similar kind of thing, but it's for the actual generation of power. So you would use this to identify where you might want to build more reactors, or for tactical power you can put in the generators, which is a bit like a UPS, I suppose, or wind farm. They both have pros and cons, and they work to supplement the power that comes from your reactors. Executive I'll come back to for another devlog. That's to do with commands that your team up in orbit issue, and are very much sort of game-wide commands, so they are much more for the strategic long-term planning of your missions, rather than sort of day-to-day events that are happening planet-side. I'll do a separate devlog for them, because that's going to be a little bit involved, but there is some very cool stuff in there. Unit selection, as I mentioned before, you can filter the kinds of units that you want within your selection group, so you can just focus on certain items that you want to issue commands to. You also have a chain of command, so every unit has a hierarchy that takes it back up to your executive team in orbit. You typically have maybe half a dozen units under a sergeant, and then a number of sergeants will report to a lieutenant, and a number of lieutenants report to the captains, and the captains will take orders from the bridge team. This is a quick way of disseminating orders to larger groups of people. So if you say the scope is for a sergeant, then any command you issue to one unit will also go to all of the other units that are under the same sergeant as that one. So it's a very quick way of grouping by squad, I guess. But these groups can get quite large, particularly if you go up to here. You could have several hundred units under a captain, so use that one with care. Order scope, yeah, same thing. That's the scope of where you want to, how far up the chain you want to send the orders. And then what this devlog finally is actually about is your research. This is a little complicated, or it can be a little complicated. It can be very simple. every unit has 3 marks available. So you've got Mark 1, a Mark 2 and a Mark 3. These 3 buildings that you see here are all Mark 3s. They're fully upgraded because they look cool. But that's not what you start with. You'll start with Mark 1 units initially. And within a given mark, there are 10 research levels, 10 upgrade levels. And the further you move through those upgrade levels, the more capable the unit will be, but also it will start to unlock things further down the tech tree. As a rule, when you get to about 60 or 70% researched, it will start to unlock some of the cool stuff that is more advanced further down the tech tree. But you don't get it all on day one. Research is comprised of what we call 6 research pillars, and it basically categorizes how a unit gets improved. You've got the durability, which is how resilient that unit is to attack, so that will affect things like sort of shields and armor and that kind of thing. Repairability, which is the time and energy required to repair the unit, the automated repair system that I mentioned earlier. It's basically how efficient and effective that can be. Efficiency is probably the hardest one to quantify because it means different things to different items, units, weapons, components. It's basically how well that thing can do its job. So if it is a weapon, then how destructive is it? If it is a shield, how strong is it? If it is radar, how far can you see? It's kind of context sensitive, but it makes sense with whatever the item is that you're applying it to. The last 3 are mass, power and thermals. As you research the efficiency, which is really the main one that most people are going to be interested in, as you research that and improve that brings good things, but it does so at the cost of increased mass, power and heat, which, as I mentioned before, once you exceed the limit of what that unit is designed to carry, you're going to start to run into problems. So everything within Titan has got trade-offs. There's no free lunch. Everything good will come at a cost somewhere, and this is typically offset by also researching the mass, power and thermal to bring it back down. So your efficiency might increase the mass by 10%, but then when you research the mass, you bring it back down by 8% or 12%. The numbers are still being refined, but essentially one counteracts the other. When you do a default research, which would literally just be clicking on one of these, that will go and add 10% to all 6 of those research pillars. So everything just gets increased 10% in its research level, which is not necessarily 10% in its abilities, but its one research level will be improved. However, once you get to grips with the game and your gameplay becomes perhaps a little bit more refined, a bit more advanced, you have the option of doing advanced research, and that will let you bring up one of these. So these are the 6 research pillars that I mentioned, and as you can see, by default everyone is just 10% increase. And you hit research, that adds a research job to your research facility over here, and it will then, over the course of the next probably 2 to 5 minutes, it will research that technology. It could be a unit, a weapon, a component, whatever it might be, and as soon as it's finished the research, which comes at the cost of a power draw, so again that pulls power from your reactor across the resource network, once it has finished that research, any new unit that you build that uses whatever it is that you've just researched will automatically get it. Things that you've already built that are out in the field don't get upgraded. You can upgrade them. It costs you energy and power. You have to garrison the unit and you can do that. But for anything new, you get it automatically if it's part of the profile. Let's say, for example, that the next time that you research it, you want to bring down the power because for whatever reason it's drawing too much power and it's causing you problems with overloading that unit. rather than it being just another 10% on each one, which will give you the 20% of each, you can take the power slider and move that up. So the whole 60%, which is just 6 lots of 10 that you had, all gets allocated to bring in the power down, which is great, but it does so at the cost of not being able to improve the durability, the repairability, mass, etc. That's the only one that you can repair, or you can bring it back down and move them back up. This gives you a great deal of control over where you want to spend your research, and you can lock a certain value. So if you want the durability to stay at 28% whilst you tune the others, you can lock it. That's then locked. Then as you move these around, they will all adjust accordingly with the remaining amount of power that you've got. Now, as you work your way up the research levels, get closer to level 10, more and more of these will start to top out at 100%, which means you get a larger amount of research left to spend on the remaining pillars. Whichever combination and permutation you choose, by the time you get to level 10, everything will be 100%. So there's no shortcuts. This just lets you specify how and where you want to spend your research to tailor to the kind of game that you play. If you research a unit, so a tank or a drone or a trooper, etc., the benefits of these will also be applied to every weapon and component that you put in that unit. If you research a weapon or a component, it's the other way round. That weapon or component will improve in every single unit that it is used in, and the actual end result that you gain from the benefit is a multiplication of the two. If you research the unit a bit and you research the weapons a bit, the actual end ability of that weapon is the unit's value multiplied by the weapon value. By the time you fully research, so you've got to Mark 3, level 10, and you've fully researched everything, it's between 4 and 5 times the power as a Mark 1 level 1. So there's just quite a significant delta between the two. And it's why during the matchmaking we try to ensure that people are roughly evenly matched in terms of their tech levels, because if you have got a Mark 1 level 1 tank as a newbie, it's just not going to last very long against someone that's been playing this for a while. So you could choose to do that if you like to go hardcore, you can do that, but by default it will try and match you with people that will give you the most fun gaming experience rather than just wiping the floor with you. The research increases that you get from here, broadly speaking, if something is researched up to 100% up here, that will increase that component, that item, by about 30% over its base model. When you upgrade between marks, so you go from a Mark 1 to a Mark 2, that increase is about 25%. So you don't necessarily want to fully research a thing to 100% before you upgrade to the Mark 2 or the Mark 3, because you will effectively have a reduction in its ability briefly, but the ability to expand it much further, if that makes sense. Again, everything is a trade-off, so it comes down to your style of gameplay and where you want to focus your resources and your efforts. If you want to research more faster, build more research facilities. Obviously that in itself takes time and it consumes resources to do that, but a research activity, one activity requires one research facility to deliver it. So if you've built 4 of these, you can research 4 things at the same time, or you can research one thing almost 4 times as quickly. Again, there are penalties for doing that, and they basically have a list of jobs that are on there, so you can keep hitting the research button and queuing up a whole load of research activities, so the research centres are always busy and productive, which is great, but that will place an increased power on the RTN and an increased demand on your reactors. It's also worth pointing out that the RTN connections that link all of these buildings, they are cumulative. So if you've got a building that's, say, 5 hops away from your reactor, because it's like a mesh, and that's drawing a lot of power, that will draw a lot of power on all of the links going all the way back to the reactor. It's not just its own connections, everything upstream matters. And as you upgrade these buildings, you improve their bandwidth and the range as well. These buildings are quite close together. From an actual gameplay, this map is 4 by 4 kilometers. Typically the buildings wouldn't be this close together, they would be a lot more spread out. So yeah, I think that is probably about it. Hopefully I've not confused everybody too much. It is a complicated game. There is a lot going on here, and it is really hard to disseminate this information to sort of a new audience without overwhelming them a bit. I've been living and breathing this for over 2 years, so this all comes as like second nature. But to anyone new, I do appreciate that this may be a little confusing. Please do ask questions. We've got a really good Discord running. We've got a great little community on there. If there is anything that you want to know further, if you want to be a play tester when the time comes, we've got a channel, private channel on there for doing that. The last thing I was very quickly going to show is building units. This isn't fully operating as it should, but it will give you quite a good idea. You have a deployment unit that comes down as part of your initial team, a bit like an APC, I suppose, a little carrier type thing. That fires a deployment payload which actually builds the building. So it's not like other RTS where you just say build this building here and it happens. When you choose your building, so if we're going to build a barracks, for example, and choose the mark, and this will only show you things that you've unlocked and researched, and this is the profile that I mentioned. You can have multiples, but the game will ship with defaults, obviously. When you want to build it, you get a wireframe for its placement, and you can turn it around, which is all pretty cool. The yellow circle that you can see, that is the range of this building's resource network. So whatever it connects to needs to be within inside that. So if you moved it all the way over here, you could build it, but it wouldn't be able to connect to anything else. Okay, so you want to have it overlapping at least one building. If we build that, what the game will actually do, or what it's supposed to do, let me zoom in here. Oops, sorry. You should get, yeah, there we go. That's it working properly. Not quite there yet, but hopefully you'll get the idea. You'll get a little wireframe, and that only you see that. Other players won't see that if you're in a multiplayer game, and similarly, you won't see where they're planning to build stuff. What actually happens is your deployment unit will then start making its way to this location from wherever it is. When it gets within range, it will fire its deployment payload, which unleashes your nanotech or whatever that will go and build this building, and then it will start to construct it from the ground up, which you should see hopefully shortly. There we go. Okay, so that's the building and its weapon systems being constructed. It's reshaped the terrain underneath it. This still needs a lot of work. This is just really a proof of concept that I'm showing you at the moment for our Kickstarter that is coming this summer. But it's really just to sort of convey the concept of how the game is going to work. So this will create you a building, and all of the guns and things that are attached to it, again, are based on the profile that you use to equip it with. It's worth pointing out these little billboard signs down here, which are quite cool. Where are we? There you go. These will be showing a whole range of data in game, because from a backstory lore perspective, Titan Corporation streamed these games to the inhabited star systems. It's a commercial thing, the war games. It's like any corporation, they're quick to cash in on war. So you're going to be able to have all sorts of stuff on here, depending on a number of factors. We could include things like your I don't know, your kill ratio for the game, stats, player stats for the game. But equally, we could include things on here that are unlocked for streamers. So anyone who views their channel would get a code that would unlock certain content that only they see, but equally anyone that plays an online game that they are the host for would also see, but only for the duration of that game. So it's kind of like a built-in marketing type thing, but in a way that doesn't ruin the game lore too much. So yeah, that's quite exciting what we're going to be doing with those, so do keep an eye on that. The little white pads that are on here, they are your transport pads. So this is a barracks. This creates troop units, and as they materialise, this is where they will appear, and then they'll go off on their patrol path and go and do their thing. And as you can see, we've got a number of lights on here as well, so it looks quite cool at night. Everything's all lit up and glowing and looking pretty cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I said if you've got any questions, it would be great to hear from you. Please do stop over to our Discord. Do check out our website, titan-rts.com. Loads of information on there, probably a bit too much at the moment, but if you like detail, then you will like our website. It does explain a lot of the backstory and the lore and the characters, and the technology that is available in the game, as it's quite comprehensive. Hopefully there'll be more of these soon, so yeah, do keep following us for more updates.